I'm an exile down here in London, member of a well-known ethnic minority. It's 40 years since I clambered over Hadrian's Wall and headed south looking for work. The English have been quite kind to me, really, very tolerant. That's possibly because they know perfectly well that we run the place for them. Prime Minister's a jock, and so are at least 6 other members of his cabinet. And there's probably been more complaints about this government than any government in living memory, but the complaint's not because it's full of Scotsmen. But I wonder why the Scots don't reciprocate. Every time I go home now, I get this awful sense of meanness, lack of spirit, lack of identity, lack of population too. The place is in decline. And I don't know what it is, but it distresses me, and I think it brings shame on the Scots. I mean, look at these incidents of English kids being put into Scottish primary schools and being bullied and taunted for being foreigners. I mean, that's just disgraceful peasant behaviour. And take football. Please take football. Isn't it a disgrace that during the World Cup, all the Scots cheer on and wear the shirts of Portugal, Sweden, Trinidad and Tobago, anybody that their nearest neighbour is playing. And holding parties when England is finally knocked out is just kind of unbelievable meanness. And I think this mean Scottish attitude springs from the fact that their own football is so unutterably bad. I mean, they even let themselves get beaten by a bunch of part-time fishermen from the Faroe Islands. And the thing is that if a Scotland international team ever got into beyond the early stages of an international competition again, which is pretty unlikely, I'm sure the English would be on their side and cheer them on. I mean, their top 2 teams shouldn't really be there at all. You know, why don't Rangers decamp to Belfast where they belong and take their bigoted supporters with them? And why don't Celtic go and live in Dublin? If you're at a Celtic game, you never see a British or even a Scottish flag being waved in the crowd. It is wall-to-wall Irish tricolour. So that, I can only conclude, is where they belong. Scotland used to produce footballing greats, Denis Law, Matt Busby, and the like. Is Alex Ferguson really the only Scottish football figure that the rest of the world has now ever heard of? It's disgraceful. The Scots took the game of association football out of the English public schools and gave it to the people. And as for rugby, while we're on this subject, who in God's name decided that the Scottish national anthem should be that appalling funereal dirge, Flower of Scotland, which make it sound like the whole country is in mourning for its granny having just died? It's dreadful. And what about the Scottish Parliament? At the bottom end of the same street where the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment was born. It's spent nearly £500 million on a building which is universally loathed. It looks like a bad accident in Beirut. And what have they done inside it? They've produced some of the most repressive, fascist, anti-smoking laws of any country in Europe. All right, they've done a few things for student fees and care of the elderly. But you know, where is the great national gesture, the thing that brings the nation together? And who's the only member of the Scottish Parliament that anybody has heard of at the moment? It's Tommy Sheridan. But it's just there is a terrible lack of spirit in Scotland these days. Terrible meanness. And I can only conclude It's because all the intelligent Scots have fled to England.